Hi, I'm Tom Wishon, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the least understood components of the golf club, the shaft. Have you ever heard someone tell you that the shaft is the most important part of the golf club? Or another way they put it, the shaft is the engine of the golf club. At any rate, there are an awful lot of people out there who think that the shaft is the single most important component in a golf club. Well, it is an important component. But what I want to talk about today is who is the shaft a very important component for, and who it is a less important component for in the face of all the other fitting specifications on the golf clubs. With the world of shafts that are out there today, we need to look at shafts from the standpoint of how they fit golfers and golfers' specific swing characteristics. From all of our fitting research over the last many years, we've taken a long, hard look at what is it in the golf swing that causes one shaft to perform differently for a golfer than another. And what are these swing characteristics and how do they match up to each of the different characteristics in a shaft? Well, let's take a look at that. Let's look at the shaft first. Shafts have basically 5 key specifications that make one shaft different from another. We have the weight of the shaft. The weight of the shaft controls the total weight of the golf club. And total weight as a club fitting specification is important to fit to a golfer's swing tempo, swing force, swing aggressiveness, their strength, and certainly their sense of feel for what they perceive to be too heavy or too light in a golf club, so that their swing tempo, timing, and rhythm can be as consistent as possible. So that's one, shaft weight. Then we have 2 elements that talk about the stiffness design of the golf club. We have what we call the shaft flex, and we have what we call the shaft bend profile. The shaft flex is basically what we talk about in terms of the stiffness of the shaft over the upper 2/3 approximately of its length. This is the stiffness design that some golfers will notice the very moment that they start the transition and begin to accelerate the golf club and start to put a bending force on the golf club. The other one, the shaft bend profile, is the distribution of stiffness over the length of the club, but chiefly we're talking about what's the stiffness design of the tip section. And the tip section is something that corresponds to when the golfer unhinges their wrist cock release on the downswing. And that's a key fitting factor that why we want to identify the point of release, the point of unhinging the wrist cock angle, so that we can choose the right tip stiffness in the shaft. So there's 3, shaft weight, shaft flex, shaft bend profile. We also have torsional stiffness, or what the golf industry likes to refer to as the torque of a shaft. This is the resistance of the shaft to twisting under the force of our swing. And the torque is measured by how many degrees the shaft will rotate in response to a certain amount of torsional force on the shaft. The idea is the stronger, the more aggressive, the more accelerating, the faster the downswing move of the ball, the less we want the shaft to be able to twist, so the lower the torque should be. On the other hand, if we're very passive, smooth, rhythmic, not a lot of acceleration or aggression on the downswing, then the torque should not be very low, because otherwise it can make the impact with the golf ball feel a little bit too stiff and dead. So that's 4, shaft weight, shaft flex, shaft bend profile, shaft torque, and the final one is the shaft balance point. What's the weight distribution of the shaft? How much of the weight in the shaft is in the upper half versus the lower half of the shaft? So these are the 5 key fitting specifications for a shaft. Now, how do they correspond to us as a golfer? Well, as a golfer, we make certain moves in the swing that cause the shaft to bend. And those moves in the swing, we can package up into what we're looking at as the club head speed of the golfer and the general average force that the club head speed exerts on the shaft. But key ones are transition, downswing tempo, and the point of the wrist cock release. All of us, when we talk about transition, we're talking about the very beginning of the downswing. How much force do we put on the club and the shaft when we start the downswing? There are some golfers who have a short backswing and can't even wait to start pouring on the coals to accelerate the club down to the impact. These are the people with a more forceful transition, and they will put more bending force on the shaft as a result. At the other end of the spectrum, there are some golfers who you can almost see the club stop with a pause at the end of the backswing, and then the downswing begins very smooth and rhythmic. These are people who have a much smoother tempo, and they're putting a little bit less bending force on the shaft as they start the downswing. Well, then through the downswing, we have golfers who continue to pour on the goals and are very aggressive as they come down to the impact area, others who are much more smooth and rhythmic. So downswing tempo, or downswing acceleration, downswing aggressiveness, determines whether or not that initial bending force that we put on the shaft from the transition will be retained and continue to the point that we're about to unhinge our wrist cock release. At that point, once we come down, there is a point for all golfers where they unhinge that wrist cock release. Some golfers, usually less skilled players, unhinge that wrist cock angle a little early in the downswing. Others do it more midway in the downswing. There are some who do it a little bit later in the downswing, and then you have some that do it very late in the downswing. The later the release, the later the unhinging of the wrist cock angle, the more aggressive that release is, the more bending force is put down on the tip end of the shaft. So in shaft fitting terms, professional club fitters who know how to match and fit swing characteristics to shaft design, they know that when they see an aggressive transition, an aggressive downswing move, and a very late release, that they're looking at shafts that are going to have a much stiffer flex profile along with a stiffer tip section so that it's going to provide the right performance for the golfer. On the other end of the spectrum, for those golfers who are much slower in their club head speed, more passive and not very aggressive in their transition and tempo, earlier to midway in the unhinging of the wrist cock release, the club fitter is going to be choosing shafts which are not as stiff in the flex design and softer in the tip design as well for this. So shaft fitting is all about matching the 5 key fitting specs of the shaft to the main swing characteristics of the golfer that dictate how much bending force and when that bending force is put on the shaft. So there again, the 5 key fitting specification of the shaft: the weight, the flex, the bend profile, the torque, the balance point, to be properly matched to the club head speed, the transition force, the downswing tempo, and the point of wrist cock release. That's what professional club fitters are trained to do when they fit shafts for golfers. Now, who are shafts more important for or less important for? When we teach shaft fitting to club fitters, one of the points that we get across to them is this, and follow this carefully. The higher the club head speed, the more aggressive and forceful the transition move, the more aggressive the downswing tempo, the later the release, and the more the golfer has the ability to feel and sense the bending of the shaft during the swing, the more important the shaft will be to the performance of the shot. So again, the higher the club head speed, the more forceful the transition, the more aggressive the downswing tempo, the later the release, and the more the golfer can sense and feel and have preferences for the bending action of the shaft, the more important the shaft is to contributing to shot performance. So at the other end of the spectrum, the slower the club head speed, the more passive the transition move, the more smooth and the downswing tempo, the earlier the release, and if the golfer doesn't have any real preferences or perceptions of the bending feel, then the shaft becomes less important for performance in the club. And at that point, for the slower swinger, with the smoother transition and tempo, with the earlier to midway release, the weight of the shaft then becomes the single most important part of shaft fitting because of its contribution to the total weight of the golf club and how that matches into the golfer's strength and tempo requirements. So those are the basics of what shaft fitting is all about. And this is why those club fitters who are very experienced, who study the technology and really practice the technology, that's why the better professional club fitters are really where you need to go to be custom fit with the right shaft for you and your swing characteristics. Thank you very much, and best wishes in this great game.